My name is Dr. Umar Johnson. I'm a doctor of clinical psychology, certified school psychologist, certified school principal, also a political scientist. I'm in private practice, primarily working in Pennsylvania as a school psychologist where I evaluate children for special education placement. I do mentally gifted testing, psychological counseling, therapy, assessments, teacher training, behavior modification, so forth and so on. I'm also author of Psychoacademic Holocaust, the Special Education and ADHD Wars Against Black Boys, which is the only book out right now that teaches black parents how to protect their children from academic racism and abuse. I'm a blood relative of the great Frederick Douglass, and I am also in the middle of a campaign to purchase the historical St. Paul's College, a black college in Virginia, and turn that into the Frederick Douglass and Marcus Garvey Academy, which will be America's first residential school built exclusively for black boys based on the principles of Pan-Africanism and African culture.
Brothers and sisters, around this time, 150 years ago, the United States Congress ratified the 13th Amendment, which we know did not give us political and economic freedom, but gave us a degree of physical freedom.
Right.
This December of 2015 will mark our 150th year since the official close of slavery. So this year, we must engage in some very deep reflection because we have to ask ourselves a very important question. And that question is simply this. After 150 years since the close of physical slavery, can we use the excuse that the white man is the only reason for why we haven't made more progress? We have to look in the mirror and be honest.
Yes.
And ask ourselves, despite all he has done, and of course he is the #1 enemy of African people in progress, but is he alone to blame for why we are not much better off now than we were 150 years ago? And if the European is not exclusively to blame for our predicament, then who else is to blame?
We are.
We have to understand something, brothers and sisters. In order for there to be an oppressor, there must be an oppressed person who is participating in his condition.
Yeah.
In order for there to be an enslaver, there must be someone who is enslaved, who is participating in the condition. So as much as we talk about white supremacy, we have to look at the black complicity in our situation. And I'm saying this now because I don't want another 150 years to pass and for us to still be in the same situation because we don't want to look in the mirror and acknowledge that most of us are as white as our oppressors are. To acknowledge that most of us are infected with the same gene of Europeanism that our oppressors have. It's one thing. It's one thing. It's one thing for another person to oppress you. But it's something altogether different when you participate in your own oppression because you're too comfortable to do something about what you're going through.
The Ferguson, Missouri protest that grew out of the assassination of Michael Brown by Officer Darren Wilson, I believe those protests were legitimate and I believe they were carried out as they needed to be. It was not perfect, but I disagree with many of our civil rights leaders, such as Reverend Sharpton, who felt that the protest should have been totally nonviolent. I agreed with the aggression, and I also agreed with, the degree of violence that took place. because in this world and in this country, the only thing that gets attention is violence. And if we want to make an issue out of what has happened as it relates to police brutality, I think it was very necessary that the brothers and sisters, the African American community in Ferguson, react violently. And as a consequence of their violent reaction to the assassination, the United Nations Office of Human Rights was forced to step in and evaluate the white police murders of black males. And they actually repudiated the United States government for their handling of assassinations of black men by white police officers. So believe it or not, because they were violent, it forced the world court to look at what is happening to black men in this country. They got results from their violent protests. Had they walked down the street with candles and sung "We Shall Overcome" and simply had a prayer vigil, Michael Brown's assassination would have been treated like so many others, just another loss of a black male's life with no consequence whatsoever. So I agree with what they did. I agree with how they did it. My only constructive criticism would be what it is for most of our movements, and that is the follow through, the continuation. Black people, we tend to have a lot of moments, a lot of good moments. The Million Man March was a moment. The Ferguson protests were a moment. The Eric Garner protests were a moment. The reactions to Hurricane Katrina, it was a moment. But we need movements. We keep having moments. We need movements. We are not going to change our predicament in one day. It's going to take years of evolution to get this done. So we have to gradually transform and evolve from moments to movements.
Right. 150 years, but we ain't got no supermarkets.
Right.
150 years, we ain't got no airline.
No.
150 years, we ain't got a 100% totally African-owned bank that invests in the community. 100 years, where's our dry cleaners? 100 years, we don't produce no automobile, but we invented every part on it. 100 years. Brothers and sisters, we can do better than this.
In trying to solve any problem involving police brutality and unnatural loss of life, you have to understand the history of police brutality. And from the very beginning of America, the police job was to keep black people in their place. They were never there to protect black people. They were never there to assist black people. The police have always been an agent of force, an agent of the state to oppress black revolutionary thought and behavior. And so as long as you have discontented black folk, you're always going to have police violence. Now, how do you slow this down? How do you control it? How do you contain it? You can't get rid of racism, because in order to get rid of racism, you would have to get rid of white people. And so racism will always be. But we have to be able to contain and control it. And I think the best way to do that is we have to hold white people accountable by disrupting something that is so central to the function of America, and that is the economic culture of this country. Black people account for $1 trillion economy. Okay, we are almost exclusively responsible for making non-Africans in this country multi-millionaires by the way in which we consume things. If you look at hair care, if you look at certain automobiles, if you look at malt liquor, certain types of clothing, Air Jordan sneakers, I mean, there's certain items within the capitalistic market that are almost exclusively been made and branded by black folks' love for them. So I think we have to start looking at our economic behavior and how our economics, or better yet, our disorganized economics, actually helps to influence our poor political standing. There's no such thing as a strong political foundation without a strong economic foundation. For example, if we were using our collective economic wealth to control the elected officials, if we were using our collective economic wealth to control the behavior of businesses in New York City and in other places, Michael Brown might still be here. Eric Garner might still be here. Here's the question you have to ask yourself. And as a psychologist, we always deal with how behavior is controlled by the consequences. Operant condition. All human behavior is a function of what happens as a result. When Officer Darren Wilson exited his car and drew his weapon on Michael Brown, when the officer here in New York decided to choke Eric Garner and not let him go until he was dead, in those men's minds, as is in the minds of any human being, what is going to happen if I don't stop? If I kill this boy, what's going to happen? If I choke this black man to death, what's going to happen? Okay? Nothing. I'm going to get off. And so as long as the African American community doesn't offer consequences to both black folk and white folk for the mistreatment of black people, what they do can only get worse. Because in the law of psychology, all behavior gets stronger over time. So what am I saying? I'm saying there's going to be more police killings. This is just the beginning. As Obama transitions out of office, as we get a new president, whether that's Governor Christie, former Secretary of State Clinton, whomever it's going to be, there's going to be more killings. Why? Because when you don't offer appropriate consequence to a behavior, it gets worse. You have children. I have children. When our children do things that are not appropriate, you have to give them a consequence to weaken their resolve to do it again. But if you don't give them the consequence, what did that do? By not giving the consequence, you just strengthened the likelihood that it's going to happen again. So the black community has to look at how our disorganized economics and our weak political foundation is actually feeding the murder of black boys. It's one thing to look at the racism, but we also have to look at our complicity in it by what we do and what we don't do. As my ancestor Frederick Douglass always said, for every slave, there's a slave master. For every slave master, there's a slave. We can talk about the enslaver, but what about the slave who participates in his enslavement? The victim always has a degree of responsibility in the situation because the victim is not powerless. We just choose not to exercise our power. I felt that the officer who killed Eric Garner was likely to get acquitted because I saw that the momentum within the criminal justice system was basically putting forth the energy that basically stated that we're not going to send police to jail for killing black men, which has a precedent. In slavery, white men didn't go to jail for killing black men. In Reconstruction, white men didn't go to jail for killing black men. And it was codified. If you look at Jim Crow, you look at the black codes, it was in law that you do not go to jail for killing white people. Chief Justice Taney of the Dred Scott decision, who said what? A black man has no right that a white man is bound to respect. That Dred Scott decision, that law has never been overturned, and it applies perfectly when you want to interpret just how these police officers are constantly being not acquitted. They haven't even been indicted. You see, they're not even been indicted. Now, the Trayvon's murderer, he was indicted and acquitted. But these police officers, they're not even being found to have done anything wrong, which just makes what they did all the more grotesque in the eyes of the public, because what the grand jury said, we can't even find something. After looking at the choking video, after looking at what happened with Michael Brown, the grand jury, the public, the white public, is saying that we don't see anything that they did that can even remotely constitute a crime. And I think that in and of itself is what enrages black folks so much. In other words, had they taken them through the trial and acquitted them, for a lot of black people, they could have lived with that. I couldn't have, because I knew what they did was wrong. But a lot of black people would have said at least justice took its toll. But here you have a situation where we don't even see a need to bring charges. And I think that's what woke up even the most conservative black person. It had to make them look a little bit differently at what's happening. And I would add to that, why are we seeing so much of this now? Because we're reliving the 60s all over again. Why? There is an increased attempt to incarcerate and exterminate black males because we're no longer needed for the American social order to function. There's more black women in America than black men. If we can reduce the numbers of these black men, these sisters will not have men to build families with. They will not have men to have children with. It is a mild eugenics and birth control strategy when we look at the incarceration and extermination of black males. We're not needed. President Obama is about to do what? Bring 5 million, mostly illegal immigrants to America. Why is he doing that? Because they need those immigrants to replace black people in the economic order. When slavery ended, one of the first decisions that was made by the United States Congress was to begin a gradual elimination of the African American population. We wasn't even African American back then, we were just Negro.
How do we get rid of these people who we never wanted to be here? And you know what's so significant about 2015? This is our 150th year since the end of slavery. In December of 2015, we celebrate 150 years since the 13th Amendment. So here we are at a crossroads in our history. 150 years, and all the racism that we thought went away came back. Why? Because they think they can get rid of us. They really see a possibility of America without the black man. And they're working towards to make that a reality, because the black man is no longer needed as a laborer. They have other non-white people of color to work those jobs. You see, so if we don't have jobs for black people, what do we do with them? Incarcerate them and kill them. And that's why they're building more jails than schools. And that's why they're closing down schools by the dozens, because the purpose of schooling is to prepare you to work. That's why schools were created, for work, you see. But if you don't have work for black people, what do you need schools for? You don't. Shut those down, build jails, bring in the immigrants to take all the remaining jobs, and just let black people die a slow, quiet death of economic starvation.
I don't mind talking like this, brothers and sisters. When y'all first learned who I was on the national scene years ago, I was attacked. People accused me of not having no credentials because I didn't come out and say I graduated from the Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine with a doctorate degree. They attacked me because I didn't say I got my master's in school psychology from Millersville University. They attacked me because I didn't tell them that I got my principal master's in cert from Lehigh University. I was attacked. They accused me of everything under the sun because people who thought they run this thing felt that I was encroaching on their territory. Youth and elder. In many respects, my oratory has been as much as a blessing as a curse. Since I don't have an equal on this thing we call a microphone, it breeds jealousy and envy, and people attempt to destroy. But many of them had to take a step back for one reason and one reason alone. Actually, two. Number one, Dr. Umar Johnson's proof is in my damn pudding. That's number one. Who has helped more African children than me? Call his damn name. Who has helped more mothers fighting for their boys in school? Call his damn name. Who put more kids out of special ed? Wrote more letters to the judges to keep them out of jail than me? I don't just talk this. I walk mines. My proof is in the pudding. I don't make a living running around the country giving my opinion but not doing shit. My proof is in my pudding. The other reason why they had to back up is because y'all said so. It was the people from New York to California, from Houston to Chicago, who said, y'all can attack whoever y'all want, but him, you will leave him alone. And I'm going to thank y'all for that. Because I don't take what I do for granted. I don't take this time in front of y'all for granted. And y'all know I like to come up and I like to have fun and crack my jokes, but I take it home every night.
What do you think led to the moral and the educational decline with the black and African communities?
I think whenever we talk about moral behavior, and this is a message I like to put forth to our religious leaders because they like to deal with everything from a moral standpoint. One of the fallacies with that is if people are not getting their basic needs met, morality is irrelevant. For example, people talk about how back in the 30s and the 40s, coming out of Reconstruction, just before the Civil Rights Movement, towards the end of the rise of the Garvey movement, people say, well, we had our families, most black women was married, most black men was married, we still had our vagrants and our delinquents, but largely we were a self-respecting, upstanding, self-employed community. We had our own business, we had our own moral fabric, our culture, and now look at us now. We do whatever we want. We come out the house half dressed. We don't respect the women. We don't respect the men. We don't respect the children. But a lot of this is the result of economic desperation. The black man had a family because he was able to provide for a family. Today, the black man has no family because he cannot provide for the family. Back then, black women, a lot of them may have had a little bit more dignity because they had a lot more going for themselves back then. Black youth were a lot more focused because we had more programs and opportunities for them. The political economic structure of the black community has been ripped out. And this began in the 70s. It intensified in the 80s with the war against black men, falsely called the war on drugs, okay, which took all the economic opportunity out the black community. If we go back in time, a lot of our grandparents were able to work in the neighborhoods where they live. A lot of our grandparents didn't have to go to college. My grandfather was a butcher. Him and my grandma, they live in an excellent home, okay, grandmom-in-law, okay, his wife, they live in a nice home, okay, live comfortably. We know a lot of African Americans who are elders in their late 60s going up until their 80s who were able to make a decent living as a laborer with no college. But in the 70s, they said, okay, we have to do something about this because black people are amassing enough wealth to compete with white folk. They're taking over the jobs. So what are we going to do? I know what we're going to do. We're going to deindustrialize the inner city. Remember, black people came up to the north during the Great Migration to take jobs while the white man went to war. Okay, we weren't allowed to fight in World War I, but they did allow us in World War II. So we came to New York. We came to Philadelphia for work during the war. Well, when the war was over and white men came back, guess what? The black folk got laid off. But a lot of us went into business as plumbers, electricians, carpenters, and we were able to take care of ourselves by looking out for the needs of other black families. So what did they do? Deindustrialize the inner city high schools, take out the trade programs. You can hardly find a high school now that teaches you to be a plumber, an electrician, a carpenter. It's all gone. To do what? Make sure black men can't feed their families. Make sure black women can't feed their families. And then they started sending everybody to college, which produces nothing but debt because most black folks with master's and doctorate degrees can't find a job. So you ain't got no skill to eat. You got a college degree, but you can't find a job because most of the degrees we get in college are only useful if there's white people hiring you. Okay, my doctorate degree, there's no black folk looking to hire a PhD psychologist. So most of our college degrees are dependent on being hired by the American economic system, you see. And so basically they brought the drugs in. You got all these unemployed black men. No economy. CIA brings the drugs in. We got an economy. Crack. So black men started selling the only thing that was available to bring in income, and that was drugs. But if you look at it through a moral lens, oh, he's wrong. How can he sell drugs? Yes, it's wrong, but he's doing it out of a necessity. And if you're not going to give him an opportunity to do anything else, it will continue. Who were the original criminals in America? Who were the original drug dealers? The alcohol, selling the booze, the gangs, Jewish immigrants, Italian immigrants, Irish immigrants. They were the ones breaking the laws. They were the ones running the rackets, the numbers, the drugs, because they were not considered to be white folk until the 1940s. But in the 1940s, the United States government decided to make Southern European immigrants white folk. They gave them the police department, the fire department, the civil service jobs downtown. And as a result of that, they moved up. That was their economic stimulus package. Black people never got an economic stimulus package. All we did was take over the underworld that was formerly controlled by the Southern European immigrants. Crime is not a function of genetics. Crime is not a function of race. Crime is a function of the economic order and lack of opportunity. When jobs are plentiful, crime goes down. When jobs are not plentiful, crime goes up. Everybody knows this. But whenever we talk about unemployment and crime with black men, no one draws the connection between miseducation, unemployment, economic castration, and incarceration. They just want everybody to think that they're born to commit crime. All they want to do is kill because they don't want to solve the problem.
Which is why I argue we don't have a conscious community per se. We have a learning community.
Yep.
Because once one truly becomes conscious, behavior follows that awakening.
Yeah.
So if you claim to be conscious and you ain't done shit to change your situation, You ain't as conscious as you think you are.
No. Still a drip.
But let me go a little bit further. When people come in for therapy, right? I'm a therapist. People come to therapy, they're conscious that they're an alcoholic. They're conscious they're on crack. They're conscious they're depressed. They're conscious they're anxious. They're conscious they have bipolar. They're conscious of their anxiety problems. But just knowing that you're sick don't mean a damn thing.
Right.
Unless you're going to transform the sickness into health. Are y'all following me?
Yeah. Following you.
So when we say we are conscious, are we bragging about the fact we know we're sick, we know about the sickness, but we don't care enough about it to do something about it? Information does not change the unconscious program upon which we operate.
Right. Glory.
I could put a laptop computer up here, put a flash drive in it, with all negative information about African people. Take the negative flash drive out, put one with all positive information about African people. But the computer will continue to run the way it's been running because the central processing unit will take the data, positive or negative, and use it as a weapon of destruction. You see the same thing amongst the learning community. Everything we learn, we use it to fight somebody else with it.
Yeah.
Every ideology, every religious persuasion becomes cause for combat.
Right. Yeah.
That's no different than a gang on the corner. See, until you deactivate the Willie Lynch chip, which is in the subconscious, you don't change Negroes into free people.
Right.
In fact, let me go a step further with you. When we talk about properly educating African children, I think we miss the central importance of education, which is not education.
Right.
Schools do not primarily exist to educate. The primary purpose of education is socialization.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Your son can't read, but he knows the Star Spangled Banner. Your daughter can't count, but she can name all the presidents of the United States of America.
Yeah.
They don't know nothing about Obama, but they love him.
You're right.
Because the socialization is more powerful than the education. The education is the information. But socialization teaches the people how to think, how to act, and how to feel.
Right.
You can teach black children all day long, whatever you want, but until you socialize them, until you re-socialize our children, until you change the way black people spend, they can study ancient African civilization all day and still go to the Chinese store. I want to deal with it.
Deal with it, brother.
Because this is our ancestors' year here.
Yes.
2015 is 150 years. Our ancestors are saying, I know y'all can do better than this. Because we did better with less.
Yes. Speak.
Harriet Tubman said, wait a minute. What do y'all mean y'all can't stop police brutality in New York City? Do you realize we stopped the whole damn slavery machine?
That's right.
Come on, brother.
George Washington Carver says, what do you mean
Come on now.
you can't live without the white man's medications?
Yes, right. Talk about it.
When I transform not only pharmacology, but agricultural science.
Yes. Yes.
Brothers and sisters, Napoleon Bonaparte. And I'm no supporter of any white supremacist.
We know you not, brother.
But as a student of military science, I study all generals. I study all wars. And a lot of the wars I study don't even involve black folks.
Right. That's right.
But I got to study the science. And what did Napoleon say about war? He said that if I had to choose between a well-equipped army with no guts and courage versus an army that was poorly equipped with the guts and courage, Give me the army with the guts and the courage versus the ones with the weapons, because the moral is to the physical. 3, 2, 1. So the reason white supremacy is beating on us ain't just because we don't own nothing. It ain't just because he runs the economy and the criminal justice system. White supremacy is beating black folk because white folk know we scared of them.
Yep.
Can we be honest? See, this is why we gotta socialize the children. Because when you socialize, you eliminate the fear. But when you just educate, you don't. How many smart-ass, scared Negroes we have in America? How many mainstream Afrocentric scholars who know everything about our past, but scared as hell of confronting the oppressor? Education is one thing. Socialization is something totally different. For those of you who've been in the military, you know exactly what I'm talking about. When you went to boot camp in the Marine Corps and boot camp in the Army, when you went to boot camp in the reserves, you got an education. They opened up books and taught you what to believe. But it didn't come to life until they made you live it. And through the socialization, which is done in groups, they were able to take you from being who you were to what they wanted you to be. This is why I support homeschool. But I understand that it's a temporary band-aid until we have large-scale academies where we can socialize en masse. Because one of the biggest issues that African people have is getting along with other African people. And if it's one thing that we got to crush and crush now, it is the ego of the Negro.
Whenever you want to gentrify a neighborhood or a city, you want to drop the property value as low as you can. So you let the neighborhood go to hell. You drop the property value. And you do that so that when white folk make up their mind that we're going to come back into the city, come back into this neighborhood, and take it over, they will be able to buy up the entire city for nickels and pennies and dimes on the dollar, and then turn it into the multi-million-dollar private neighborhood that they want it to be. So to answer your question, yes, not only Detroit, but I think Detroit is probably the most obvious and aggressive example of how white government, okay, and society creates poverty as a pretext to creating a booming, private, overly expensive white suburb or white urban metropolis. You let the city go to hell, white people rush in and buy it for pennies, and in 2 years, to live in Detroit, you probably have to be a multi-millionaire. Okay? I spend a lot of time in Detroit. In fact, that's one of the places I'm looking at putting a school. If I'm not successful in getting one of the residential schools, if I have to do a regular school before I do a residential school, I'm looking at Detroit because the school's sitting all over the place. The conspiracy, though, is it's very difficult for African Americans to buy the abandoned properties. It's very difficult. People are saying, why aren't black people buying up Detroit? Because they're running into all sorts of red tape. Why? Because between the Arabs and the Anglo-Saxons, they got a deal going on in Detroit where they're trying to buy up everything, okay? And if we don't fight that and get that land back, because Detroit is our best opportunity, in my opinion, because it's dirt cheap, nothing's there. We can literally go in and transform Detroit if we really wanted to, okay? But what they're trying to do is make it difficult for black people to acquire the property. And if we don't get it, I guarantee you, in 10 years, Detroit will be the new New York City.
We got to call them down. They're watching, but they know we ain't serious yet. We got to call them down. And the best way to call down our goon is to show them that we are serious about what we're trying to do. Some of you go to church, but I don't think you really understood live the philosophy of Christianity. Some of you go to the mosque, but I don't think you really understand the underlying philosophy of the Abrahamic faith. Some of you are Hebrew and study the Torah, but I really don't know if we really understand the foundational concept upon which every religious order exists.
That's right.
I don't care if you Christian or Muslim. I don't care if you Ifa or Dogon. I don't care if you Kemet or Akan. I don't care if you Palo or Lakuni. I don't care if you Rasta or any other religion. Every faith on earth, from traditional African spirituality to the religion that was made up last night, every last one of them places a premium on sacrifice as an offering to spirit in order to get something back.
That's right.
You don't get if you don't get.
That's right.
You don't get if you Christian, you believe what? That Jesus Christ had to give his life
That's right.
for the sins of the world. He had to sacrifice for you to be born again. You study Abraham, he was called to sacrifice his son to prove his worth to God. In African spirituality, we sacrifice to get assistance from spirit.
Yeah.
So let me ask y'all a question. If Jesus had to sacrifice himself, theoretically, whether you believe it or not, let's look at the parable. If Jesus Christ had to sacrifice himself for the sins of the world, and if Abraham almost had to sacrifice his son to prove his worthiness to God, and in every spiritual tradition there's animal sacrifice in order to invoke spirit for assistance, and those of us who study traditional African systems, we know that the greater the problem, the greater the sacrifice.
That's right.
So if black people are trying to get out of white supremacy, if we're trying to regenerate African people, if we want a 21st dynasty of our own, if we've allowed all of our negative karma of not standing up to white folks collect itself into one big cuddle,
Yep.
am I wrong
You
in
right.
asserting that given the problem in front of us, the sacrifice to spirit in order to get help will have to be greater than any other sacrifice in the history of man? In other words, black man, you better get ready to boogie after Obama leaves office. Black woman, you better get ready to boogie when Obama. And I'm not an alarmist or fatalist. I don't like to be the bearer of bad news. But I know this cracker we live amongst. And I know that after Obama is gone, not that he's stopping anything, they just want to save his public image for you. But when he's gone, white folk gonna take us back to Jim Crow. And we better be ready to defend the honor of our women and our children. Stop giving your guns back to the police.
That's right.
You need a CJ Queen? Okay. Now, brother, can't sit on your lap. Hear me out. Everybody remember the Deacons for Defense?
Yes.
We remember that. Niggas with guns.
Yeah.
Brothers, it's time for us and sisters too. On the down low, not advertising it on social network. Time for us to start organizing ourselves into military units. The time is here now. The time is here. White folks are going to create a situation that's going to force you to stand up or get laid down. We better be ready to rock. We better be ready to rock. Now some of us say, well, we can't beat the United States government. Umar, what are you talking about? You're right. You're right. But we're not fighting to win him. We understand we're outnumbered. We understand we're outgunned. But the moral is to the physical 3-1. So if we're not going to win, Dr. Umar, why do you want us to fight? I'm going to tell you why.
Tell us why, brother.
You don't fight a bully to beat him. Because you might can. You fight a bully to get your damn respect back. You're going to have to fight white folks to get our respect back. The best might beat his opponent. He may keep his title, he might win one. But if that opponent rumbled his ass right, you don't ever want to see him again. He might have won the war, but the moral victory was ours. Jesus Father. And speaking of incarceration, we got to stop forgetting about our brothers and sisters behind bars. If you got a brother or a sister or a friend behind bars, brothers and sisters, please go visit them. Please do it. And I'm saying that not just for their psychological health, but I know that the blacks in prison are the first to be used as research monkeys for white supremacists' latest technology.
Yes, they are.
Your brother in jail, you ain't been to see him, he ain't had no money on his books. White man come to him, say, you want to test a certain drug. If you take this drug, we'll give you $500 on your books. Next thing you know, he find out he can never have another child the rest of his life because he wanted that $500. I want to say that we're going to keep on pushing, keep on fighting. I want you to bury the hatchet this new year with anybody you had a problem with, anybody you ever had an issue with. Start fresh.
That's right.
Forgive them. Let bygones be bygones. Start fresh. Black people, we carry too much negative trauma from many years. Negative karma, negative trauma, grudges, regrets. Forgive yourself too. Some of us can forgive other people and can't forgive ourselves. And do you know why we don't like to forgive ourselves? We don't think we're worthy of it. It goes back to self-hate and self-denigration. You ain't talk to your mother? Call. You got issues with your daddy? Work it out. You and your son and your daughter, they way on college and y'all kind of left on a bad note, go visit them. Sneak up on them. Surprise them. And give them a hug. One of the best ways to disarm an African is to just hug them. Now I know some of us say, I don't like touching everybody. I can understand that. But all you got to do is go to the Shea Butter Queen. She can smudge you out. But in the meantime, give somebody a hug. I see somebody looking at me, they got some hate, I'm gonna go right over and hug them. It's hard to keep up a negative pulse when you're in the face of a positive charge. So let us go into the new year with positivity, with belief we can overcome. Don't let me say this and I'll leave you before I give you my favorite quote. The white man has colonized Africa. He has colonized New York. He has colonized our music. He has colonized our inventions. He has colonized our culture. He has taken over everything possible, but he has not yet won until he colonizes one thing. And this is the one thing that you must fight for. Do not let white supremacy colonize your mind. As long as your mind stays free, there is hope for African people. But the minute you say our condition is beyond repair, the minute you say we'll never overcome this oppressor, the minute you say God must have fixed it like this, you have given white supremacy its greatest victory. And that is in convincing the opponent that he is invincible. Don't you ever surrender that to your enemy. What does the song say? Lift every voice when hope unborn has died. Don't let nobody kill our children's future. There's an African proverb that says, as long as another baby is born into the world, that's evidence that God has not given up yet. Those who struggle, there's no progress. Those who profess to favor freedom and deprecate agitation are like men who work crops without plowing up the ground. They want the rain but can't stand the thunder or the lightning. He said they want the ocean, but we're scared to deal with the roar of the waters. He said the struggle we have might be physical, or it might be moral, or it might be both physical and moral, but it must be a struggle. He said men may not get all they work for in this world, but you must certainly work for everything you get, and these you must pay for with blood, or with sweat, or with tears, or even with your life. But freedom is not free. He said, for 20 years, I prayed on my knees to God, but the good Lord gave Frederick no freedom until I got up off my knees. I started praying with my feet. He said, if you want respect, why are you looking for pity? The man who pities you will never respect you, and the man who respects you has no need for pity. He said, in slavery, I learned that the slave who was whipped the most was always the one who was easiest to whip. He said, we determine how poorly white folks treat us, not them. I leave you in the words of the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey.
Teach them.
Second only to Frederick in prominence, who named his first Black Star Line steamship the SS Frederick Douglass. Mr. Garvey said, in a world of wolves, in a world full of wolves, you must go on. And Garvey said the most powerful defensive weapon that black people can use right now to fix our situation is to practice race first.
Race first.
Be black, be African, be black African before you a Sigma or a Q. Be black African before you a Delta or a Zeta. Be an African before you a Mason or an L. Be an African before you belong to one of those blue vein societies. Be an African before you anything else. Be African before you Muslim, African before you Christian. Be African, and everything else will take care of itself. He said the Jew is a Jew first. The Arab is an Arab first. And you must be African first. Stop putting yourself last while the rest of the world put themselves first. And lastly, Garvey said that if black people really got to know ourselves, if we really got to know ourselves, he said if we really got to know ourselves, we could transform our condition in 24 hours. Going forward, 2015, we're not fighting over what to call God no more. We're going to respect everybody's decision to call God what they want him to be. Going forward, we're not fighting over whether we Moors or Hebrews or guys and Earths, Nawapians, Pan-Africans, Socialists, whatever we want, let's respect everybody's right. First of my ancestors was a black man named Bell. He stolen from West Africa, brought to Talbot County, Maryland. He married Grandmom Selah. They had Grandmom Jenny in 1745. In 1774, 200 years before I was born, in 1974, Grandma Betsy was born into slavery, but she married a free black man, Grandpa Isaac. They had a daughter named Young Betsy, who was raped by Aaron Anthony, who owned my family, giving birth to Stephen Henry Belly, my great-great-great-great-grandfather, who was the younger brother of Frederick Douglass, whose mother, my Aunt Harriet, was raped by the same slave master, making Frederick and Stephen cousins and brothers. The moms were sisters, and the slave master was both their dads. So Grandpa Stephen wasn't as lucky as Uncle Fred. Uncle Fred escaped at the age of 20, but Grandpa Stephen remained behind slavery in Maryland. He married a black woman who was enslaved on the same plantation, Grandma Caroline Wilson. They jumped the broom. Their firstborn son, George Washington Bailey, 1841, my great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. He was born in slavery. Civil War kicks off. Grandpa Stephen stands up and tells Grandpa George, you coming with me, son. We got to fight for the freedom of our people. Uncle Frederick told Lewis and Charles, I know y'all my sons, but I need y'all to go fight. How can I be the leader of black folk if my sons ain't willing to shed blood for their people? When the Civil War was over, Grandpa George married Annie Wayman. She was the niece of Bishop Alexander Wayman of the African Methodist Episcopal Church under Richard Allen. They had a daughter by the name of Caroline. Caroline moved to Philadelphia after her parents died to live with her older sister. She had a daughter named Vivian, and Vivian married a Spanish-speaking Cuban immigrant named Cicero. Then they had a daughter named Ida, and Ida married James Johnson, and they had Jamal. And Jamal married Barbara. And 11 generations later, Barbara and Jamal gave birth on the anniversary of the Haitian Revolution, and the anniversary of the Nat-Turner War, and the anniversary of the Frederick Douglass Fugitive Slave Convention, and the anniversary of the George Jackson assassination. Umar Johnson was born in North Philadelphia. One of the very first projects at FD&G, in order to graduate from my school, your child is going to have to, with our help, reconstruct all 4 roots of their entire family tree by the time they graduate. That's why you gotta support that kid. Ain't no school like the one I'm going to give you. Booker T said, be as separate as the fingers, the things that are individual to you. But in things common to us all as a people, we must join those fingers as a fist. Under one God, one aim, one destiny. New York City, I love you. I say